Welcome back to What Was That? India's premier podcast because I said so on tech and business news. Everything, basically, everything. We talk about everything except politics because we like our homes. Hi, Ritesh. How is Bangalore? How is life? How is your home?
Hey Vineet, we'll talk about those less important things afterwards. What is the etiquette for attending a concert with your side piece? Should you get front row seats?
Get front row seats. Don't take other team members along so it looks like everyone is in on the sort of news except your poor wife and your poor husband. Don't spark a million conspiracy theories. Just, don't be an asshole.
But then how do you get to the CEO post in the first place?
That is a very good question. That is a very good question. Oh my God, that is a philosophical question. How do you get to become CEO if you're not an asshole? There are exceptions, right?
There are, but very, very few.
Very few, but we can, let's name them. Let's be nice. I quite think Nitin Kamath is one of the good guys.
Okay.
Patagonia before it sold out to private equity.
Yvonne Chenard, I think his name is. Lovely tap.
You give me two examples.
Just all of Costco's leadership.
Costco, yes.
And Warren Buffett?
I was waiting for you to say Warren Buffett. No, I still don't think Warren Buffett belongs in this list because he's invested in, like, capitalism makes it easy to be one level removed or two levels removed or 20 levels removed from the evil that any of your investments do, right?
Yeah.
That's the same veganism debate, that if we had to kill the animals, we would all be vegan, or most of us. But because we're just going to the supermarket, where do you think meat comes from? Comes from the supermarket. So, yeah. So I
didn't front load the bleakness in today's episode.
Yeah, why not? As a when we decided to start off on a positive note and name the good guys.
I was just talking about how to better manage your affairs.
And here we are talking about killing animals.
You took it there. No. I probably have quoted this on an earlier episode, but since barely anybody has watched the earlier episodes, not to imply that anybody has watched the latest ones, but relatively speaking, I thought Buffett made a very nice distinction in this regard. He said, see, there are degrees to this. Berkshire and Buffett himself never directly invested in a tobacco company, right? But Costco sells cigarettes. So it's not like they could have attempted to use their influence to say, no, you can't sell these products. But Buffett was quite clear, that's not our job. But investing directly in a tobacco company is a bridge too far. So I think it just comes down to that, having a conscience and listening to it, because it's largely subjective. You and I would probably draw the line in different places on many of these issues.
Oh yeah. Morality is absolutely subjective. Morality is absolutely subjective, and I prefer people who are open about their morals.
Exactly.
So, right, a large part of LinkedIn culture is, why is my opinion better than yours? So let's not have any morals in the first place. That's part of LinkedIn culture, capitalism, whatever. It becomes gray, it becomes sticky. So why have opinions in the first place? So yeah,
let's just start.
This went from Coldplay to
it's all real
in capitalism and veganism in like 3 minutes. We are 4 minutes in.
Yeah, we've done a speed run today. Let me start my story. I'm really excited for this because it ties into so many themes that we have discussed. What if Apple came to you and said, could you please be part of our manufacturing ecosystem for the upcoming iPhone? The opportunity that companies and countries and continents clamor for today. What if Apple came to you and said, could you please just make this one thing and give it to us? And you said, no, it's too niche, too small a business. It's not going to work out for us. So we're not going to do it. Put a pin in that. Second, what if in 2017-ish, OpenAI came to you and said, listen, we are a deep tech machine learning startup, and we're looking for funding and a strategic partner. Why don't you take a 15% stake in OpenAI? And if you're that thing you manufacture, if you're willing to give that to us at cost, we'll give you another 15% stake. So you'll own 30% in OpenAI for what is a rounding error on your current balance sheet. And you said, no, we don't see this generative AI model going too far. Do you know which company passed on both those opportunities? It's the same company.
Indian company?
No.
No. Right.
Wow. Apple approached Intel in 2006-7 when the iPhone was still being developed and said, listen, we need a new type of processor because your current architecture is too energy intensive. We want a new processor for a mobile device which needs to be less energy hungry so that the battery can last at least through a full day. And could you please make a new type of processor for us using this new technology called ARM, for which you have acquired a startup and you already have the resources. You just need to greenlight this project and you will be an inherent part of the iPhone ecosystem from day one, not even day one, day zero. And the CEO said, "Nah, pass. It's too niche for us." That actually happened. And the same
And
Intel.
this is not even 98, 99 Apple, which was still in trouble.
Yeah, it's post iPod, post Apple resurgence, Apple. Yeah, post Steve Jobs coming back.
Post a few years of iPod.
Yeah, and it's so bizarre after when Apple in 2005 finally said, okay, we are moving completely to Intel processors for our Mac line after 20 years of avoiding it, because Intel was the supplier to IBM and Apple was the not IBM, right? So Apple actually started shipping Macs with Intel processors just 2 years earlier. And they both had done spectacularly well from that partnership. So it's not like Intel wasn't familiar with Apple. The iPod had already happened. So it's not like Intel couldn't see what Apple could do with these mobile consumer products. The iPod was a phenomenal success, right? Nobody thought that a music player would sell to the extent that it did and become like a cultural icon.
Like we still remember those ads, right? Those
Silhouette ones. Yeah, with the earphones. So they said, no, we're not going to do it. And then a decade later, with generative AI, OpenAI's terms were so beautiful. They said, take 15%, invest $1 billion in us, plus those wonderful chips that you make, the hardware that you make. We will require a lot of that because we're going to need a lot of computing power in the future. So why don't you just give that to us at cost? We're not saying give it to us for free. Give it to us at cost. And for that privilege, we'll give you another 15% of OpenAI. We will give it to you. So you will effectively own 30% of OpenAI for $1 billion. And what was the last touted valuation? Somewhere between 300 billion and a trillion, right? Depending on which side of the bed Masa vote from.
$200 billion, $3 trillion, $25 bazillion.
Somewhere in that range, right? But definitely more than the imputed $6 billion value that Intel would have invested at.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Definitely more than that. They passed. They said, no, this is too niche and we don't see this going.
One is, these are big cash-rich companies, right? Intel makes a lot of money.
Yeah.
Actually, these days, I shouldn't presume that with Intel these days.
But back then it did. It did.
Back then, 2017.
It wasn't going to be a stretch for them. Either
there was M1. There was no M1. They were competing with AMD. AMD was still, it wasn't an upstart, but AMD is AMD. It comes and goes. They would be very cash rich. If I were that cash rich, I would just be throwing around money at these things.
So now that we have established who the company is and the blunders that they make, let's rewind. Acquired style. I love the history of Intel because they became that Christopher Nolan line. You either die a hero or live long enough to become the thing that you warned everyone against. Because Intel was one of the companies that created Silicon Valley, right? One of the founders of Intel was Moore who coined Moore's law, which has been the secret for all the prosperity of humankind for the last 50 years. That Moore's law. He was one of the founders of Intel. And as a company, okay, they had that amazing creation myth, and they were instrumental in early Silicon Valley in the 60s and in the 70s. And in the 1980s, the CEO, Andy Grove, he read this book called The Innovator's Dilemma, which again, seminal book, which clearly warned that, it is the incumbent's responsibility to keep disrupting themselves from within, because if they don't, then disruption will come from outside. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what the book said.
Yeah.
Right? And Andy Grove completely embraced this philosophy. At the time, Intel was printing money from making RAMs, DRAMs, right? So Andy Grove went to Moore and the other founder of Intel, and basically the whole board, and he said, we need to get out of this business because it's going to get commoditized. Imagine that. Right at the peak, when they were making bucket loads of money, he said, we need to get out of this business now while we are still at the top. And they completely exited the DRAM business and moved to making processors, which was they were doing fabs in the 80s. It was a difficult business, and they were fully integrated. They did the design and the manufacturing. They built the powerhouse that is the 8080 architecture, on which probably all the coders of the last 2 generations have learned how to program, including me. That's how seminal the 8080 architecture was. It was the foundation of coding instruction for like 2 decades. And it was actually still being shipped. So Intel is featured in the Innovator's Dilemma, the book, as one of the examples of how to do disruption and innovation correctly. Because 2 examples. One was exiting DRAMs and going into chip manufacturing when it was not considered a volume play, when it was not considered profitable, when it was considered not worth the effort, right? And secondly, when the Pentium line and the the Intel Inside program was at its peak, counter AMD's challenge of we are going to have processors that are just as good, but quite a bit cheaper than Intel. So to counter that, Intel launched the Celeron line. Do you remember that?
Celeron, yeah.
Celeron, right. Okay, Celeron. So these 2 were featured as examples in the book of, look, here's how you can do this. This can be cracked. You can be the market leader and you can still hold on to that position, so long as you're not fixated by your current business model. And what did Intel do? ARM came in. It was the fad, so they acquired an ARM company, but never did. ARM is basically a mobile architecture, right? Which incidentally Masa had a big stake in and just went public recently. So it's all these stories interconnect eventually.
So a question here, which in fact I had thought I would resolve in my mind, but I haven't yet. ARM is the architecture or the company, or both?
It is a proprietary architecture, which is owned by
the company called ARM,
which then licenses it out, and which is basically the architecture on which most mobile devices in the world today are built, and that is a big thing.
But it's also become a generic term, right? So, for example, when you say Intel acquired an ARM company, is not
they acquired a company which builds on the ARM architecture.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's still proprietary. It's still owned by the ARM Holdings Co., which Masa has a big stake in through SoftBank.
Yeah.
So, yeah, imagine that you finally won over the last bastion of, there was this big set of users who were not using Intel processors because they were using Macs. And finally in 2005, you got them also on board. That was like the peak for Intel, that they had conquered all that there was to conquer in the world. And then what happened? They got disrupted because they refused to adopt mobile. They refused to, for the longest time, they refused to accept the paradigm that NVIDIA represented, which is chip design and manufacturing are two different things. And it has gotten advanced enough that you need to pick a lane and then specialize in that. So it's the same thing Intel does or did what NVIDIA and TSMC do, but under one roof. Imagine that. And they're like a fraction of the value. In fact, the reason I chose this story this week is because of a statement the Intel CEO made. Nice guy, a veteran of the industry, Lip Bhutan. He said it's too late for Intel to catch up with AI competition. We've fallen out of the top 10 semiconductor companies in the world, and we're probably not going to be able to catch up.
Reminds me of that reminds you of that Microsoft guy who went to Nokia and said we're on the burning platform, and yeah,
We're sinking. Yeah.
we're sinking.
But Nokia was killed by Microsoft. Yeah, they would have still been around if they hadn't gotten into bed with
And Windows was such a nice interface. Windows, like whatever it was called.
Windows Mobile. Yeah, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. They had those tiles. Yeah, it was a nice UI.
I had a Zune, and I loved that thing. I so preferred it to an iPod.
Yeah.
So yeah, Microsoft was doing some great things. But again, Microsoft's another example, right? Like there's just such a fixed way of thinking. It's like a Godzilla, right? You can't be agile, you can't be nimble. You go in one direction, you just keep going in that direction, and nothing can change you.
So the Xeon was built on ARM architecture, but the processor was supplied by Intel. So that was the reason they had acquired that company, which they subsequently divested of. But they had everything they needed to fulfill Apple's request for, we're going to make a phone, please supply a processor to us. And they said, no, we know best. This is not worth our time.
This is not worth our time is something they said, but maybe the actual reason was why boost our competition, right? What do you think? What's your assessment there?
So there have been
what's the potential competition there? Now, of course, there's competition.
Right. So there have been multiple interviews with the CEO after that when he was asked about this specific moment, because this is like taught in B schools and all. It's such a common example of how not to fuck things up when you're at the top. And he said, see, there were two things. The specs that Apple gave to us on that day, we would have lost money on every unit that we shipped. Okay. As the volumes and the specifications that they asked for, we are going to lose money on it. Number one.
As Apple is known to do with its suppliers, right? It could just strong arm its Chinese suppliers more than something like Intel.
All of that came later, Vineet. At the time, Apple was not in a position to strong arm anybody.
Apple was strong arming, 2006, 2007, fair.
There
are still stories, again, from that book. There are still stories. They were still doing it even then. And in that zone.
But they did not have nearly the amount of leverage that they got afterwards, right? So the second reason he gave, which in fairness does sound more plausible, is that everybody, including Apple, underestimated the volumes that the iPhone would do by a factor of 100.
Yeah.
So who would have thought? And I almost feel bad for him. Like long after he's gone, this is what he'll be remembered for. So yeah, they imagine having that lead and floundering it. So it brings to mind, what is it? The question that kept popping up in my head when I saw this pattern repeating over and over again, and not just with Intel, we've seen it with other incumbents also, of why does this happen in large organizations, and how can you safeguard against it? Is it even possible to foresee and preempt something like this happening?
Then that comes back to the whole Silicon Valley culture, right? See, replicating wild success multiple times is not easy. There are so many factors that you don't have control of. What becomes a cultural phenomenon, you don't really know. Very hard to predict. So then the only way to keep doing that again and again is to become a monopoly. Oh, sorry, moat. Moat is the preferred term, not monopoly. Just that's the only way. So that you become big enough, you become the Godzilla in the room, so that anyone else who comes, any upstart who comes, you just kill them or buy them. So that is the only way then to keep replicating success. Unless you become the monopoly, you become too big to fail, too big for governments to mess with you.
Yeah, there's an easy answer here. No? See, all these companies at their peak are almost inevitably cash rich. Okay. And they all come to that fork in the road of, okay, we have a pile of money. It's way more than we need to run our business. What do we do with it? And almost always they take the easier path of shareholder buybacks. I mean, share buybacks or dividends or whatever. Let's return the money back to the shareholders. Why not take the other path and say, okay, we have this bunch of money. Why aren't more cash rich, especially tech companies, better at angel and VC investing?
That's a very good question.
They have a unique industry insight. I know Google Ventures exists. I know that this has been done, but no one has been able to institutionalize this. Of, here, this is a part of our core R&D process, that basically we have outsourced our R&D to this bunch of entrepreneurs in various garages. And, the moment we see even a little bit of potential in their idea, we're going to take a strategic stake. Don't fucking buy them out and bring them in and poison them with your culture. We're going to take a strategic stake and leave them alone. Let them build. Don't compel them.
I like, even if you talk to the VC crowd, it's all stuff they like to say, but don't like to do. They don't know how to. Even if they're invested in 30 companies, they just don't know how to properly leave them alone. And in fact, see, the thing is, you go to any VC fund's website, they're not talking about the money. Well, they are talking about the money, but the money they just talk about as a hygiene factor. No, we are much more than the investment. It is about the mentorship. It is about the network. It is about the value add. It is about what else we bring to the table, right? The money is the money. Who cares about the money? Money is a commodity. So, and then you start getting high off your own supply. Or as I now keep saying in my mind, you start believing your own LinkedIn posts. So, yeah.
There's an easy way to solve this, or at least prevent it from happening for the next generation of VCs. You want to become a VC? Great. I know what the track is now, but the track should be, you've got the qualifications, you've got the network, great. Go out and be a small cap investor for 5 years. Understand all the ways in which you can be defrauded, and understand how little control you have, even in fantastic companies with great business models, of where once sales crosses, say, 1,000 crores, you can make all the noise you want in a shareholder meeting. But if the founder, the promoter who owns 75% wants to buy a Maybach, he's getting a Maybach. And there's nothing you can do about it. With company money, mind you. Yeah, you really need to just see how powerless you are in the face of small cap promoters who own 75% of the company. Okay. They make it very clear. There's no dancing around, because there's no, in the minds of the small cap investors, apart from the very big institutional investors, the investors are interchangeable, especially retail investors. Like, aaj tu hai, koi aur hoga, no? My shares are trading on the bourses. You might not even be a shareholder by the end of this week. So why should I care about what you're saying?
Yep.
And that's exactly the kind of humility that VCs need. And also to see all the shenanigans that small cap promoters pull once they have more cash than the company needs. My God, the kind of things they buy, the kind of companies they buy, the kind of adventures they go on. It would be funny if it wasn't your money being burnt as an investor.
It is this, like real estate also. The best thing you can do is just put your money there and leave. And that's what they do, right? In real estate, people are used to doing that.
Yeah.
And then one of their 5 investments will give mega returns. And then the next 10 years, they get to go to parties and be like the guy, like, I have made so much money, therefore I am the smartest guy in the room. and you should listen to me about everything. VCs just start that way. They're getting their funds from very rich people, and startups are hungry for small amounts of money. So the VC is the guy who, and again, I blame LinkedIn culture for this, right? Getting high of their own supply, they start believing it's like capitalism and meritocracy says that if you work hard, you will make money.
Right.
Therefore, if I have money in my pocket, therefore I've worked hard and I must have earned it. I must have deserved it. So therefore, everyone deserves to listen to me about everything. Intel, same problem. Any large company eventually, Google invented GPT, right? Pretty much. They sat on it for many years because it's eating into their AdWords. It would eat into their AdWords money if they let it out into the world. So they only woke up once ChatGPT came out on top of Google's architecture. And then they were like, oh, by the way, we invented this. Don't forget us. We invented this. Too big.
One of
Too innovate.
one of the very first articles that I wrote on my almost defunct now newsletter was about Archie's, the card company. Archie's is listed, okay? So you can go back. This is not stock advice. Archie's happens to be listed. So you can go back and see everything that they've done like in the last 20 years because it's all on the public record, right? And because the internet existed even 20 years back. Archie's created this industry and utterly dominated it of creating cards, of gifting.
Yeah.
Especially romantic gifting, but even otherwise, just gifting. Like they owned Valentine's Day. They owned it. When people of a certain party wanted to make a statement against Valentine's Day, where do you think they went and broke or damaged things or broke glass storefronts? It was Archie's, right? Because that was a symbol of Valentine's Day, of gifting, of love in the early 2000s. For any millennials watching, do look up Archie's. It was a weird place. So we had birds called, we had these things called greeting cards, and yes, it was a different.
It's like just now if I see an Archie somewhere, I'm like, oh, how quaint.
So, anyways, Archie's had a website in 2002. They tried e-commerce. They tried every possible wave of innovation that was coming to erode at their moat and eventually wash them away. They tried to get on top of each of those waves. They actually did, and at the right time. But the execution sucked. And so they failed. And in the article, I concluded that, again, tying it back to the innovator's dilemma, because that's when I read it, Lockheed Martin had the same problem a good 50 years back. Yes, I connected Archie's and
Like,
Lockheed.
nobody was going to their stores and eBay RSS was beating them up on Valentine's Day. Same problem.
No, they had the innovation problem of how do we prevent being disrupted from outside. And the solution, which is rightly pointed out in the book, is to establish a skunk works. To have a division of your company that's outside your company physically and culturally, far removed from what the mothership does, and which has virtually unlimited resources, whatever the company can afford, which in Lockheed's case was a lot, and even in Archie's case was not nothing. To have this new startup, like Archie's is based in Delhi, if they had set up a company in the early 2000s in Bangalore, they would have eventually become the size of InfoEdge at least. Just by being here and having those resources. They would have built something that would have survived as, if nothing else, become the Cameo of today. Because now gifting would be me asking a celebrity to wish Vineet a happy birthday, right? That's a thing that Archie's would have found their way to. If they were thinking tech plus gifting, what can we do? How do we build a brand new product that does not depend on Archie's existing printing presses? Archie's owns a couple of printing presses, by the way, and our paper supply chain and all of that. Just clean slate. What would gifting look like in 20 years? And they would have arrived at that if they were physically and culturally removed from the mothership, like the Skunkworks did with Lockheed Martin, and then created the B2 and all those fantastic new technology paradigm stealth bombers. That's what the Skunkworks was. And that's what Intel failed to do. They had stakes, or they had offers to participate in the cap table of brilliant companies. You couldn't establish a skunkworks. You could have at least done what Yahoo did with Alibaba and said, okay, we might not be able to set up a marketplace in China, but we know this company that's doing it. We can see this and nobody else can. And so we're going to just put a bunch of money here. And that redeemed Yahoo's legacy, right? Yahoo itself died, but the shareholders made a lot of money because of their Alibaba stake. They could have at least done that. Intel could at least have done that. When they came to that fork in the road and they saw that NVIDIA has disrupted this space, they could have said, okay, we made a mistake. We're going to split our company into two on the exchanges as well. And there goes the fab and there goes the design arm. And, let their roads diverge here and let's see where they end up. Like GE did with its 3 divisions. And this is possible. It's not that all financial engineering is bad. This was a cultural problem that could have been solved by financial engineering. And instead, they just did stock buybacks and returned the money to shareholders. And the management earned their incentives of whatever milestones they had set. And the company itself withered away. Squandered that opportunity of when Steve Jobs comes to you and says, please make this for us. Squandered that. What a shame.
Such is life. I have no sympathy for Intel. Why?
No, this isn't about sympathy. It's about until managements and investors learn this lesson, it's going to keep happening every single fucking generation.
I don't think they can. It's a combination of too many things. It's like, one is ego gets into the picture. I am too good for you. Why should I invest? Why should I lend my name to your cap table? You gain so much from the brand that Intel brings to your cap table, right? From investing in smaller companies. Then there is a lot of the initial success of many companies is just right place, right time. Right. There is some gumption there, but a lot of it is just right place, right time. You can't keep replicating that. So, too many factors. So, companies come, companies go. Yes, sir. Let us move on. 35-minute mark. My first story is on this very... How can a suit not be a suit and lead to rebellion? Polymarket is a fascinating place. It's where people bet on everything. It's where people bet on, will Trump be president again? And everyone throws money at the problem, right? People are bored. People with too much money are bored. So, yeah, they bet on everything. It's like those IPL betting things. Actually, IPL is still very well protected. The international sports betting thing where what will happen on the next ball, what will happen in the next 2 minutes, everything. It had a bit of a rebellion a couple of weeks ago over a suit. Because after the whole thing, when Volodymyr Zelensky went to the US and he was sort of talked down to by the right-wing press, by JD Vance, for not wearing a suit to his meeting with Trump. And that's where JD Vance said, did you even say thank you? Etc., etc., right? Like, the whole conversation was, this is so much disrespect. How can you not wear a suit when you're meeting Trump? And this guy, like running a wartime economy and running a wartime country. So, and he projects himself as the man of the people, the man of the army, on the front line with them. So there was a big bet going on about whether or not Zelensky will wear a suit or not within the next 6 months.
Okay.
And there was apparently $210 million or more riding on this one wager till July or not. So then there was a dinner before a NATO summit and he wore a black jacket, a black shirt and black trousers. And people are like, hey, there's a suit.
That's a suit. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was, the other view was, no, he's wearing a jacket. He's wearing trousers. They're the same color, but that doesn't make it a suit. They don't match. which comes down to the definition of a fucking suit. What is a suit? What makes a suit? Did they define that? No. So there was a rebellion on Polymarket because there was so much money on it. And then they decided that this was not a suit. And then, which opened a huge can of worms about the dispute process at Polymarket, which gets really interesting because there is a dispute process. You can just, file a dispute, put in $750 and say, look, I don't agree with the results of this trade, of this bet.
Mm-hmm.
And people did that. And turns out their dispute resolution mechanism is linked to decentralized blockchain type systems.
Oh, okay.
That, okay, we will just send it to this different company. And there the people holding tokens in that decentralized mechanism get to vote on what was the right resolution. So because, like we've discussed before, very often there's no right or wrong, right? It is just let enough people decide and that's the solution.
Right.
They again voted, no, this is not a suit. But then people started complaining that this is not a fair dispute resolution mechanism because, as was the case with most decentralized chains, right? Decentralized tokens, the whole Web 3.0 thing. That was such a thing that everything in the world was going to be Web 3.0 by 2025, right? Everything in the world. What happened to that? So, the same problem. How these decentralized tokens work is, let's say there are 10 tokens and let's say there are 11 tokens, and 11 people can buy a token. And then those 11 people get to vote on these things. And if it gets 6 votes, it's passed. Great, problem solved. The problem was the phenomenon of whales. Whales being outsized entities who can just go in and buy 6 tokens. That was a huge problem covered in Silicon Valley, in fact, also, where you can just buy out somebody's company by buying 51% of the overall tokens and just take over and then change the rules, change everything. And you had to prevent something ever going from 51% external ownership. So then people started complaining about there being whales on the dispute resolution mechanism. And this is so easy to game. Because just figure out the largest bets, put money on the counter, right, and then come here. The whales can game everything and game the whole platform.
Yeah.
And why the story is also interesting is that Polymarket is in the middle of a fundraising round, which is led by my favorite person. I don't know if he's yours, Peter Thiel.
Ah.
The man is everywhere doing everything. The man is evil incarnate, but yeah, he wanted to invest in
Emperor of democracy.
Of democracy and capitalism as it stands today. Yes. He was about to do this round, and now there are these allegations of scams and these allegations of corruption and these allegations of a rigged system. I'm sure all of this is actually going to encourage Peter Thiel even more to invest in the company, right? It's exactly what he loves. Thoughts?
You know what I was thinking? And I'm sure a lot of people of all kinds have said this, if I was in Zelensky's space for this one specific thing, I would place a very large bet on Zelensky wearing a suit. And then on the very last day, when the odds were completely in my favor, I would wear a suit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And use the money for good, to buy good bombs and good drones. But I would absolutely do that. That's the problem and the joy of Polymarket. That, this isn't, you aren't betting on the weather. And it's like the, not IPL, no, not the IPL, but like the Hansi Cronje days of cricket.
Oh God.
Where enough money is riding on a specific outcome. Of course, forces are going to come together to make things that way.
Yeah. It's like, I can imagine the temptation to play around and screw around.
Yeah.
If you are the subject of one of these things
And the fun thing is, we could have started a bet this morning on Polymarket whether our recording will cross the 1 hour mark. You can do such inane shit, and you never know what captures the zeitgeist. And everyone says, "Yes, I am invested in this outcome. I am certain that this is going to go a particular way, and I'm willing to put money on it." And that's
Yeah, I heard that people in the US were betting on some random uh, small municipality level pool game going on in the Netherlands somewhere. And then something in Korea. And वो रात को 3 बजे बैठ के they are like just watching everything and chatting along. People are bored. People need more to do.
Yeah, and it's completely unregulated. It's brilliant. And why would Thiel not invest in this?
Why would he not?
The role he was born to play, the suit he was born to wear.
Or not?
I love this story. I love Polymarket for what it does, and I love every time it is featured in Matt Levine's columns. So there are, like, whenever a financial event happens, there will be a bet on whether what position Matt Levine will take on that in his column. That's how specific Polymarket is. And then he comments on that. Here are the odds, and here's how I feel. And he has actually said this: I'm so tempted to put money and influence the outcome.
Yeah, and there's no regulation, right? So you might as well. There's no regulation.
I love this. Yeah.
So it's not like insider trading at all. Well, it is insider trading perfectly, but it is not.
But it is a perfect system, right? That everyone knows that there are certain actors who can influence the outcome. So it's fine. So it's pure entertainment. Again, not like IPL, which is excellent cricket and not at all predetermined.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but like Hansi Cronier days of cricket.
And I heard so yeah.
No current events.
Story number 2.
Yeah. So for my story number 2, I had originally picked a Raghuram Rajan editorial which said that India doesn't innovate enough. And I had 2 specific examples of pharma companies who had abandoned, because Rajan in his article specifically called out pharma companies and said Indian pharma is not innovating, they're just making generics. And in the same week, 2 Indian pharma companies have all but given up on the generic manufacturing model and are doing hardcore innovation.
Wow.
And yeah, I love that story, but then I found something more shiny, more exciting.
But what was that hardcore innovation, by the way? Delivering medicines in 8 minutes or delivering medicines in 6 minutes?
Glenmark found a fantastic, like they discovered, developed, and got through trials a fantastic drug, which they have now licensed to a global pharma major who will be selling it across the world. So this is like world-class product.
Very cool.
Completely designed, developed, and shepherded through the entire approval process in India. So love that. The second company that I picked was Wockhardt, which has developed a new antibiotic, which is for multi resistant strains of every other antibiotic has failed, because there is that, right? There's MRSA, where and terrifyingly you could contract MRSA while you're in the hospital for like a small wound dressing or a tetanus injection. It is possible to contract MRSA that way, and then there is no treatment for that. Everything else is failed. So I don't know if Zainich, the drug, works specifically for MRSA, but it is in that space, a gram-negative antibiotic for when everything else has failed.
What is MRSA? I put
multi-resistant strain. Like it's a pathogen which is resistant to all known antibiotics.
Oh,
so you are fucked basically. If you get MRSA, you are fucked. So there is a race on developing antibiotics for that. So that was going to be my story. Nice, lots of little cubby holes we could have explored. But like I said, a much sexier story broke this week, and so I want to talk about that. Bloomberg had a nice long article about Tiffany & Co., the jeweler. So Tiffany & Co. is the famous US-based jeweler. They have those iconic Tiffany blue colored boxes, which were synonymous with like engagement rings, and they're a part of American culture and strategically important jeweler, let's say, for
Hmm.
US culture, US pop culture. They were acquired by LVMH. Patek Philippe is one of the big three OG Swiss watchmakers, and they, to mark 170 years of partnership with Tiffany and Co., released a special edition of a very specific model that they made, which is one of the most coveted models of Patek, which had like a years long waiting list. And to qualify to buy that, you had to buy a bunch of other watches, all that shit. They launched a special edition, which was in the Tiffany blue color, the dial, and they left it to Tiffany. This was limited edition. They left it to Tiffany. You do the allocation of who you want to sell this to, because supply is going to be, or rather demand is going to far outstrip supply, and we don't want to have that problem of who do we sell this to. In our boutiques we decide, but for this specifically, for the Tiffany model, you decide. Tiffany naturally pushed buyers because this was like a watch which, if you could get your hands on, you could sell at 50 to 60 times what you paid for it in an hour on Instagram. That's how hotly coveted it was, right? So Tiffany salesmen were ultimately given the allocation, and all potential customers who came in saying, I want that Pi 711, the Nautilus, in that dial. They said, yeah, buy some Tiffany stuff first and then we'll see. This is not a promise. I'm not giving in anything in writing, but like, just buy some stuff and then we'll see. They bought millions of dollars worth of jewelry in the hope of getting the watch, in the hope of getting the watch. And obviously, it was a limited edition, so not everybody got the watch. And that actually burned a lot of bridges at Tiffany, because this is like, imagine the partnership is 170 years old. Tiffany has been around. It's an institution, and they have multi-generational relationships with many of their clients. And a lot of clients just, they were left with a poor taste in their mouth, and they compelled Tiffany to take back everything that was sold to them under this guise, and they just stopped buying from there. So imagine squandering centuries of goodwill over one model. And
No, there were more. I got very confused at some point. So people bought millions of dollars worth of stuff to get access to this.
hope of getting one of these coveted watches
Ah.
allocated to them by Tiffany, who had final say on who gets these watches. And the Tiffany management also, wink wink, said, yeah, we will decide, and it's not linked to the purchases, but it kind of is.
Yeah.
So you buy some stuff and then we'll see. Classic. All the luxury brands do this. Hermes does this, although they settled a lawsuit which said we do this. They settled it out of court for the Birkin bags. Ferrari does this. You have to buy a lot of shit Ferraris before you get a chance to buy the good Ferraris. Rolex famously has been doing this for 5 years now. I have an anecdote coming up very soon. So that's all the luxury brands have kind of perfected this model of getting their most coveted pieces behind a lot of high margin bullshit that nobody wants. And the only way to Mecca is through buying all that crap, whether you need it or not. So the Bloomberg article itself mentions, in the end, that's where it concludes. It speaks of this guy who bought 5 Ferraris that he didn't want in the hope of getting an allocation for the Ferraris that he did. And finally, that never happened. He got shafted there, and he got shafted on the Patek watch as well, the 5711. There was only one Tiffany Nautilus that was available for anybody who wanted it. It was auctioned. It was auctioned for, how many millions was it? 4, 5, something like that. I'm not able to recollect too many numbers in my head right now, but yeah. So that was the only show.
That happened when these guys did not get the watch that they wanted.
Yeah. So they held up their end of the bargain of, yeah, fine, I'll buy your fucking jewelry. Let me have the watch. They say, yeah, we'll get back to you. And they never got back to them. So they said, fuck you, take back the jewelry. I'm never shopping here again. And there are,
Like, did they go back to the stores, or was there like a class action thing?
no. This is, none of this is documented. It's all one-to-one personal relationships. I'm sure the threat of going to court was thrown around, but Tiffany yielded and said, yeah, they generally don't take back stuff above a certain ticket size, but they made an exception. They said, yeah, if you bought around this time and under this premise, we'll take back whatever we sold to you at cost. We'll take it back. So that happened. I am a bit of a watch nerd, so I could probably speak for an hour on this and wear you out, but I will still insist on putting in one anecdote. The COVID lockdown happened around March 25th, 2020. And stores were allowed to open again on weekdays or on weekends, something. Stores were first allowed to reopen somewhere in June, if memory serves, right? For some reason, probably because I was bored of being cooped up, I tagged along when someone I know wanted to buy a Rolex. Okay, now this was it was a big occasion, like they were celebrating a big milestone, and they said, Nitish, watch nerd that you are, come along. And I'm not going to say no, right? First of all, getting to drive around during the pandemic, and second, you're going to a Rolex store. That's always fun, or used to be at least back then. What I didn't know, what I don't think anybody knew, was that as soon as stores opened, not just in India, around the world, whatever inventory there was of Rolexes particularly, and yeah, in the watch universe, specifically for Rolexes, whatever there was in stores was sold immediately. And whatever production Rolex had lined up was sold. There was like a bubble in the watch space. So it hadn't started yet. It started on the day, at least in India, that I went to that store, and the cases were full. You know, you hear these stories about people saying, oh, I had 5 Bitcoin in 2011, 2012. And just imagine if I had just held on to them, I would be a multimillionaire now, or I would be a billionaire now. I don't have a Bitcoin story, but I have a Rolex story. Because on that day, if I had like leveraged myself to the hilt and just bought out the store's inventory, because they had everything. They had models that were never seen again in stores, because they wouldn't even reach the store. They would be sold from the airport. Kya ye aa raha hai? Okay, divert it to me and it would go. There was that much demand. If I had just leveraged myself to the hilt and bought out all the inventory of the store on that day, I could have probably retired in a year. In 1 year. And on that day, I managed to negotiate a discount for the watch because nobody knew yet कि क्या होने वाला है.
So did you buy a watch and did you sell it later? Or do you still have it?
No, the folks that I went along with, they bought the watch. I negotiated the price, managed to get a discount on a Rolex in 2020. That is going on my CV. I don't know why it's not there yet. Because what happened afterwards was like, for an example, one of the watches was offered at what was the MRP on that day? 3 lakhs, I think. And in 4 months' time, it was selling used online for 12.
Wow.
And this was true of most of the models. Because
why?
All of people had disposable income, nothing to do with it. They couldn't go out.
Why buy another? Like, actually, I just don't get limited edition markets at all. So maybe I'm speaking from, like, I don't have that prefrontal cortex lobe, medulla oblongata, whatever it is, left ventricle, right ventricle, aorta in my brain. So I don't get limited edition. It's like, oh, my Sony camera, suddenly they'll write this X on that and it'll be 3 times the price. Like, I have hobbies. I have lots of hobbies.
In fairness, I would never understand why you would spend as much on lenses as I'm sure you do. I would never understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't judge hobbies for that. Like, I've been in many rabbit holes for hobbies. But just a good Sony lens is a lakh and a half. Let's say I do want that lens because I believe it's the best lens in its class and I do this for it, or even as a hobby, right? I'm never going to earn from it. But as a hobby, I want the best lens. Sure. That applies to all hobbies. There's like the rabbit holes you go down where, there is that price escalation. But, this lens would be a lakh and a half otherwise, but they have put this mark on it and this photographer's name. So now it's 5 lakh rupees. So buy it and then later I can sell it used for like 15 lakh rupees. That is the part. Who is the one? Why would anyone pay 15 lakh rupees for what is otherwise a 1.5 lakh rupee lens? That
Leica exists. Leica exists, right?
Mm.
That's exactly what Leica is.
But Leica resale is not higher than Leica MRP.
Rolexes were not limited edition. That's the bizarre thing. The Patek was. That was a very specific micro market.
If they're
So
not
that's
limited edition, then why is someone buying it for 12 lakh a year down used? Why?
Because they want it now. They want it now. If I go to my Rolex retailer and say I want this watch, I'll get it in 3 years. If that.
That particular model or any Rolex, any good
That particular model. And this is true of like half of Rolex's catalog. And so they also do that shit of buy a lady date just with diamonds and we'll consider putting you on the list for a Submariner. They do that.
I think my sum up is rich people have way too much money and it should be taken away from them forcibly.
No. How is your takeaway from this? Eat the rich. It's so fascinating. This is a hobby meeting supply demand, classic supply demand economics, meeting Veblen goods where Rolex keeps hiking prices and people just want them more.
That one line itself is like rich people have too much money, it should be taken away from them.
But Vinith,
If I want a great lens, right, 1.5 lakh rupees on a lens I want to spend. Obviously, sorry, you'll have to wait 3 years and I will treat you like shit. And here's these other 5 lenses you have to buy to work your way up to that one lens that you want. I'll be like, fuck you. I will buy a different camera. I'm never talking to you again. Fuck you.
yeah, that's when you buy an Omega watch. When you say fuck your Rolex, I'm not playing your game, you buy an Omega watch, which is technically nearly as good and freely available with discounts if you want
Like
it.
this is the brands treating these people with money like shit, saying you want this, right? Again, I can totally understand. I want this. I am willing to pay a solid amount of money that others might not want to pay. Sure, for this, but saying no, my nose is up here as a brand. First, you have to buy those 5 other things, and then I might decide if I want you, if I feel you worthy of having that thing that you want.
Yeah.
Oh God, no. Part missing in brain.
For context, Rolex makes 1 million watches a year. These aren't rare goods, first of all. Okay. And second, just like Louis Vuitton and Dior and Gucci, the vast majority of their customers are upper middle class who can barely afford that one Rolex item or that one Louis Vuitton bag. These aren't
Reward, right? It's a reward. It's that also I can understand. That look, I've worked hard all my life, right? This is something nice, and which is why it's also a birthday thing, right? A self birthday gift type thing so commonly. This is something nice I want to get for myself, so I feel like it's a reward for what I am as a person. I can understand that also. Just you walk into that Rolex store, right? Look, I'm going to spend like 2 lakhs, 3 lakhs, 5 lakhs, right, on this nice watch as a gift to myself.
Yeah.
7, 10, great. And then the store guy tells you, who are you? No, I'm not giving you this that you want. You buy that, or you buy to that corner, buy that.
Yeah.
Then I might, right? If you push to that corner, then I might decide to be worthy of that, then that, then that, then that. Oh, no, God, that is the part that I don't get.
Since you brought up stores, you can walk into a Rolex store anywhere in the world, okay, including in India, anywhere in the world, and you will be greeted with empty shelves. There will not be a single watch on display. And I know of at least the Bangalore flagship Rolex store in UB City hasn't had a watch in their display for at least 5 years. And they're paying rent for 5 years.
They show you videos, what is in the store?
So now to solve that problem, Rolex has started giving retailers the watches, but without the movements, so that people can at least try them on and see how they will look on their wrist when they finally get them.
That's a display piece, right? But without the movement, so somebody can't say, sell me the display piece.
Yeah.
Okay.
Those are the only watches you'll see in Rolex cases. Although in the last 6 months, if the Rolex subreddit is to be believed, things have gotten better. Supply has gotten better. Demand has fallen off a cliff. A lot of scalpers lost a lot of money because like every bubble, there were a lot of people who came in right at the end and they became the bag holders and they attempted to sell at a loss, which further eroded value. And so they got desperate and tried to sell at even more of a loss, liquidate, get me my money back. So there was a sharp spike up, classic bubble popped, sharp overcorrection, and now prices are kind of stable. So Rolex popped the bubble, but in their own way. Because again, Rolex, fascinating company, held by a trust like Patagonia. Don't answer to any outside investors, closely held by the family, and think in terms of decades. Any projects that they take up are like along the decade timeline, not even years. So they'll do these really small improvements constantly in their mechanisms. So Rolex owns like their own foundries. They get the gold ore and start from there. They have foundries in Switzerland. Imagine at those labor rates, they're still able to sustain all of it. It's truly a unique and fascinating company that just happens to be in a business where most of the products are purchased by assholes. But the company itself and the way they are, this is classic stewardship, what they're doing, you know. You asked a question at the start of the episode. I would put the Rolex management in there for how well they manage these things.
Like, no shade on the companies at all. No shade on all these other Tiffany and all also, right? They have figured out how to extract.
Tiffany fucked up and Louis Vuitton
I mean, it will happen at some point, right? If you've been running a model successfully for many years, the best way to get money from rich assholes is to be an asshole to them. Right. These missteps will happen. And again, 3 days later, those same rich assholes will be back. "Acha, can you sell me that, please?"
Yeah.
So memory is short. No shade on these companies at all. But yeah, somebody should take the money away from rich people. Would you do this? You are a watch fan, right? You are a true believer in the industry. And if you went to the store, ki, look, I want to reward myself with a 20 lakh rupee watch.
Right.
And you say, 3 साल बाद आना, उससे पहले ये देखो, ये देखो, ये देखो, ये देखो. Practically, that's what's happening, right? What would you do?
No, I don't play that game.
Exactly.
No. And there are better watches, frankly. So this is a running.
If a watch store did that to you, would you still be okay with that?
No, because there are so many options. I don't need to.
It says limited edition.
Yeah, but I still have some of my self-esteem intact. Imagine even after doing engineering and all of that. Yeah, I still have some self-esteem in it. So no, I'm not playing that game.
Okay, I think we should make an exception and stop at 1.5 stories today or 3 stories today.
Yeah, we've gone well. All right.
Perfect. Next time, see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.